The morning sun peeked through the blinds of John Miller's small apartment bedroom. His alarm hadn't gone off yet, but John was already wide awake. He had barely slept. Today was the day of his big job interview at Peterson Technologies, and his mind had been racing all night with possible questions and answers. John was 26 years old with dark hair that needed a trim and warm brown eyes that his mother always said could charm anyone. He lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Dallas with his college friend Steve. After graduating with a computer science degree and working for 2 years at a small startup that paid just enough to cover his student loans and rent, John was ready for something bigger. He got out of bed and shuffled to the bathroom. The mirror revealed the dark circles under his eyes, evidence of his restless night. John splashed cold water on his face and took a deep breath. "Today is the day," he whispered to his reflection. "Don't mess this up." Peterson Technologies wasn't just any company. It was the tech firm in Dallas with offices in 3 countries and a reputation for cutting-edge work in software development. Getting a job there would mean better pay, benefits, and most importantly, a chance to work on projects that mattered. The interview had been hard to get. John had applied 3 times before finally receiving the email inviting him for an in-person meeting. In the kitchen, John made strong coffee and toast, though his stomach felt too nervous for food. He checked his phone, 7:15 a.m. The interview was at 10 a.m. and he had planned everything down to the minute. 2 hours and 45 minutes was plenty of time to get ready, catch the bus downtown, and arrive 15 minutes early to make a good impression. Steve emerged from his bedroom with messy blonde hair and sleepy eyes. He worked nights as a bartender and usually slept until noon. "Big day, huh?" Steve asked, yawning as he poured himself coffee. "Yeah," John replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm a bit nervous." "You'll do great," Steve said, patting John on the shoulder. "Remember what we practiced? Talk about that project you did for the hospital. They'll love that." John nodded. The hospital database system was his most impressive work so far. He had rebuilt their outdated patient management system, making it faster and more secure. It wasn't revolutionary, but it showed his skills. After breakfast, John took a long shower, letting the hot water ease his tense muscles. Then came the ritual of getting dressed. He laid out his best clothes on the bed, a navy blue suit he had bought specifically for important interviews, a light blue shirt, and the new tie his sister had sent him for his birthday last month. The tie was deep red with tiny blue dots. She had said it made him look trustworthy and smart. John dressed carefully, making sure everything was perfect. He smoothed his hair, dabbed on a small amount of cologne, and packed his portfolio with copies of his resume and examples of his work. Last night he had polished his dress shoes until he could see his reflection in them. At 8:30 a.m. he was ready. According to his plan, he would leave at 9 a.m. to catch the 9:15 a.m. bus, which would get him downtown by 9:45 a.m., leaving him 15 minutes to find the office building and collect himself before the interview. "How do I look?" John asked Steve, who was eating cereal at the kitchen counter. "Like $1,000,000, Steve replied with a thumbs up. "They'd be crazy not to hire you." John spent the next 30 minutes reviewing his notes about Peterson Technologies. He knew the company had been founded 20 years ago by Bill Peterson, a former NASA engineer. They specialized in security software and had recently expanded into artificial intelligence. The position John was applying for was on their new AI team, helping to develop smart systems for business applications. At 9 a.m. sharp, John gathered his things and headed for the door. "Good luck," Steve called after him. "Text me as soon as you're done." The late April morning was pleasant, not too hot yet, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the small park across the street. John walked briskly to the bus stop, going over potential interview questions in his head. "Why do you want to work at Peterson Technologies?" "Because they're at the forefront of AI development, and I believe my skills would be valuable to their team." "What's your greatest weakness?" "I sometimes get too focused on perfecting details, but I've learned to balance thoroughness with efficiency." The bus stop was empty when John arrived. He checked the schedule posted on the sign. The 9:15 a.m. bus was on time according to the transit app on his phone. He had 13 minutes to wait. John sat on the bench, his portfolio resting on his lap, and watched the morning traffic pass by. Across the street was a small grocery store with a parking lot where a few early shoppers were loading bags into their cars. John's attention was drawn to an elderly man who had just emerged from the store pushing a cart filled with grocery bags. The man was tall but stooped, with thinning white hair and a plaid shirt that hung loosely on his thin frame. He moved slowly, pushing the cart with apparent effort toward an old blue sedan parked at the far end of the lot. John watched absently, his mind still rehearsing interview answers, when he saw the man begin to load his groceries into the trunk of his car. The elderly gentleman lifted one bag and then another, each movement careful and deliberate. Then, as he lifted a particularly full paper bag, the bottom tore open. Cans, fruits, and a carton of eggs tumbled out, scattering across the parking lot. The eggs broke on impact, their yellow yolks spreading on the asphalt. The old man stood, looking at the mess for a moment, then slowly bent down to begin picking up his groceries. Even from across the street, John could see the difficulty the man had in bending over. He would reach for one item, straighten up with a wince, then bend again for the next. John checked his watch, 9:07 a.m. The bus would be here in 8 minutes. He looked back at the elderly man, who had managed to retrieve only a few items and was now leaning against his car, breathing heavily. Without really thinking about it, John stood up. He glanced at his watch again, then at the bus schedule. If he helped the man quickly, he could still make the 9:15 a.m. bus. And if he missed it, there was another at 9:30 a.m. That would get him downtown by 10 a.m., exactly when his interview was scheduled to start. It would be cutting it close, but he couldn't just sit and watch the elderly man struggle. John crossed the street and approached the old man. "Excuse me, sir. Do you need some help?" John asked. The elderly man looked up, relief washing over his weathered face. Up close, John could see the deep lines around his eyes and the age spots on his hands. He guessed the man must be in his 70s at least. "That would be mighty kind of you, son," the man replied in a voice that was surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. "These old bones don't bend like they used to." "I'm John," he said, already kneeling to gather the spilled groceries. "Frank Wilson," the man said, extending a hand that John shook firmly. "I appreciate this more than you know." John worked quickly, picking up cans of soup, a bag of apples, a loaf of bread, and various other items. The eggs were a lost cause, their shells cracked and contents smeared on the ground. "Looks like the eggs didn't make it," John said with a small smile. "No great loss," Frank replied. "My doctor says I should watch my cholesterol anyway." As John helped Frank reload his groceries into a new bag the store manager had provided, he glanced at his watch again. 9:14 a.m. Across the street, he could see the bus approaching the stop. "That your bus?" Frank asked, noticing John's glance. "Yes, but there's another one in 15 minutes, John said, continuing to help. "Don't worry about it." The bus pulled up to the stop, waited for a moment, and then continued on its route. John felt a twinge of anxiety but pushed it aside. He still had the 9:30 a.m. bus. It would be fine. With the groceries finally secured in the trunk, John closed it and turned to Frank. "There you go, sir. All set." "Thank you kindly," Frank said. "Not many young folks would stop to help an old-timer these days." "It's no problem at all," John replied. "Have a good day." He turned to head back to the bus stop when Frank called. After him, "Wait, son. The least I can do is offer you a ride somewhere. You missed your bus because of me." John hesitated. "That's very kind, but I don't want to trouble you. I'm just heading downtown for a job interview." "No trouble at all," Frank insisted. "Downtown isn't far. I'd be happy to take you." John checked his watch again, 9:18 a.m. If Frank drove him, he might even get there earlier than if he waited for the next bus. "That would be great, thank you," John said. Frank smiled and moved toward the driver's door. "Hop in." John walked around to the passenger side and got in. The car's interior was spotless, with a faint smell of pine air freshener. On the dashboard was a small photo of a woman with a warm smile. Frank got in and put his key in the ignition. He turned it, and the engine made a clicking sound but didn't start. He tried again with the same result. "Well, that's not good," Frank said, frowning. He tried a third time, but the engine wouldn't catch. John felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Battery trouble, maybe? Could be. Frank sighed. This old girl has been running fine, but she is 12 years old now. John looked at his watch. 9:21 a.m. He still had time to catch the 9:30 a.m. bus, but now he was worried about leaving Frank stranded with a car full of groceries. Do you have someone you can call? John asked. AAA or a family member? Frank shook his head. My wife passed 2 years ago. John looked at his watch again. 9:23 a.m. The next bus would arrive in 7 minutes. He took a deep breath and made his decision. Let me call roadside assistance for you, John said, pulling out his phone. I'll wait until they arrive. Frank's eyes widened. But your interview? I'll figure something out, John replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He dialed the number on Frank's roadside assistance card and explained the situation to the operator. They can be here in about an hour, John told Frank after ending the call. They're busy this morning. Frank shook his head. Son, I appreciate what you're doing, but you should go catch that bus. This is just a dead battery. I can wait. John glanced across the street. The bus stop was empty, and there was no sign of the 9:30 a.m. bus yet. He could still make it. But the thought of leaving, this elderly man alone in a parking lot for an hour, didn't sit right with him. I have an idea, John said. Let me try to find someone with jumper cables before the roadside assistance gets here. John walked back toward the grocery store. A few more shoppers had arrived, and he approached a middle-aged woman who was loading groceries into a minivan. Excuse me, ma'am, John said politely. Do you happen to have jumper cables? My friend's car has a dead battery. The woman shook her head. Sorry, I don't. John tried 2 more people with no luck. Then he spotted a man in work clothes getting out of a pickup truck. Excuse me, sir, John called out. Do you have jumper cables? There's an elderly gentleman with a dead battery. The man nodded. Sure do. Where's he at? John led him to Frank's car. The man introduced himself as Greg, and within minutes, he had pulled his truck alongside Frank's sedan and connected the jumper cables. Try it now, Greg called to Frank, who turned the key. The engine sputtered but didn't start. Give it a minute to charge, Greg advised. John checked his watch again. 9:36 a.m. He had missed the second bus. Even if Frank's car started right now, and Frank drove him downtown at top speed, he would be late for his interview. His stomach tightened at the thought, but he pushed his disappointment aside. Thank you for helping, John said to Greg. No problem, Greg replied. My dad's about his age. I'd hope someone would help him out if he needed it. After a few more minutes, Greg instructed Frank to try again. This time the engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life. There we go, Greg said with satisfaction, disconnecting the cables. I can't thank you both enough, Frank said, his relief evident. Young man, you've missed your interview because of me, haven't you? John nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral. It's okay. I'll call and try to reschedule. Greg packed up his jumper cables. Where were you headed? Downtown. Peterson Technologies. Job interview at 10, John explained. Greg looked at his watch. That's in 20 minutes. If you leave now, you might make it. I'd offer you a ride, but I'm headed the opposite way. I'll take you, Frank said firmly. It's the least I can do after all your help. John hesitated. Are you sure the car will be okay? She's running fine now, Frank assured him. Hop in. John thanked Greg again and got into Frank's car. The engine was running smoothly, and Frank pulled out of the parking lot with surprising confidence for a man his age. Which building downtown? Frank asked. The Horizon Tower on Main Street, John replied, straightening his tie nervously. I know it well, Frank said, taking a right turn. Used to work in that area years ago. As they drove, John called the number for Peterson Technologies. Hello, this is John Miller, he said when the receptionist answered. I have an interview scheduled for 10 a.m. with Mr. Davis, but I've had an emergency this morning. I'm on my way now, but I'll be a few minutes late. I wanted to let you know. There was a pause on the other end. Let me check with Mr. Davis, the receptionist said. After a moment, she returned. Mr. Davis has a tight schedule today. If you're not here by 10:15, He'll have to move on to the next candidate. I understand, John said. I'll do my best to get there by then. Thank you. He ended the call and looked at his watch. 9:45 a.m. They had 30 minutes to make a drive that typically took 20 to 25 minutes in normal traffic. We need to be there by 10:15, John told Frank. We'll make it, Frank said confidently, skillfully changing lanes to pass a slow-moving truck. As they drove, Frank asked about the job John was applying for. It's a software development position, John explained. I'd be working on artificial intelligence systems. Impressive, Frank said. You must be pretty smart. I don't know about that, John replied modestly. I just like solving problems with code. That's all intelligence is, Frank said wisely. Finding solutions to problems. What got you interested in computers? Despite his anxiety about the interview, John found himself enjoying the conversation. Frank was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and listening carefully to John's answers. He told Frank about his first computer, a hand-me-down from his uncle that he had learned to program on when he was 12. My grandson is into computers too, Frank mentioned, always talking about games and coding and whatnot. Maybe you could give him some advice sometime. I'd be happy to, John said sincerely. As they approached downtown, traffic grew heavier. A delivery truck had stopped in one lane, forcing cars to merge, and their progress slowed considerably. Come on, John muttered, checking his watch again, 10:02 a.m. They were still several blocks away. Frank remained calm, finding small openings in traffic and maneuvering through them with surprising skill. You're a good driver, John commented. Impressed, Frank chuckled. Been driving for over 60 years. You learn a thing or two. Finally, they turned onto Main Street. The Horizon Tower loomed ahead, its glass exterior reflecting the late morning sun. Frank pulled up to the entrance at 10:12 a.m. This is it, he said. Good luck with your interview, son. John hesitated before opening the door. Thank you, Frank. Not just for the ride, but for the conversation too. It helped calm my nerves. You're welcome, Frank replied with a warm smile. You're a good young man, John. Peterson Technologies would be lucky to have you. John stepped out of the car, straightened his suit, and took a deep breath. He had 3 minutes to get upstairs and find Mr. Davis's office. Wait, Frank called through the open window. Here's my number. Let me know how it goes. And maybe you could help my grandson with those computer questions sometime. He handed John a small card with his name and phone number written in neat, careful handwriting. John tucked it into his pocket. I will. Thanks again, Frank. John hurried into the building, checked the directory, and found that Peterson Technologies occupied floors 14 through 17. He rushed to the elevator, pressed the button for the 15th floor, and checked his appearance in the mirrored wall as he ascended. The elevator doors opened at 10:14 a.m., and John stepped into a sleek, modern reception area with the Peterson Technologies logo displayed prominently on the wall. A young woman sat at the reception desk. Good morning, John said, slightly out of breath. I'm John Miller. I have an interview with Mr. Davis. The receptionist checked her computer. Yes, Mr. Miller. You're just in time. Please have a seat. I'll let Mr. Davis know you're here. John sat in one of the modern, uncomfortable-looking chairs in the waiting area, his portfolio on his lap. He had made it, but just barely. He took a few deep breaths to calm himself and tried to refocus his thoughts on the interview ahead. A few minutes later, a door opened, and a tall man with gray hair and glasses emerged. Mr. Miller? I'm Richard Davis, head of development at Peterson Technologies. John stood and shook the man's hand firmly. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. Thank you for seeing me. You were almost late, Mr. Davis noted, his expression neutral. Yes, sir. I apologize. I stopped to help an elderly gentleman whose car had broken down. I couldn't leave him stranded. Mr. Davis raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He led John to a conference room where 2 other people were waiting. A younger man with a tablet and a woman in a sharp business suit. This is Alex from HR and Megan, who leads our AI team, Mr. Davis explained. Shall we begin? John nodded, feeling his nervousness return. The interview had started, and now everything depended on how well he performed in the next 30 minutes. He opened his portfolio, ready to discuss his qualifications and experience. But as the interview proceeded, John found his mind occasionally drifting back to Frank and their conversation in the car. For some reason, he felt that meeting the elderly man had been important, though he couldn't quite explain why. It was just a chance encounter, wasn't it? Little did John know that his decision to help Frank that morning would change the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. The interview lasted exactly 45 minutes. Mr. Davis asked John about his education, his previous job, and his experience with artificial intelligence programming. John answered each question clearly, trying to focus despite his rushed morning. Megan, the AI team leader, seemed impressed by the hospital database project John had worked on, while Alex from HR took notes on a tablet. "One last question, Mr. Miller," said Mr. Davis, leaning forward slightly. "You mentioned you were late because you stopped to help an elderly man with car trouble. Tell me more about that decision." John was surprised by the question. He had expected to talk about his technical skills or career goals, not his morning delay. "Well, sir," John began, "I was at the bus stop when I saw him struggling with groceries that had spilled in the parking lot. He was having trouble bending down to pick things up. I helped him gather his groceries, but then his car wouldn't start. I couldn't just leave him there with a dead battery and melting frozen food." "So you missed your bus and risked being late for this important interview?" Alex asked, looking up from his tablet. "Yes," John admitted. "I tried to find someone with jumper cables to help start his car faster. Once it was running, he offered to drive me here." "And if his car hadn't started?" Mr. Davis pressed. "What would you have done?" John thought for a moment. "I would have called you to reschedule if possible. If not, I would have stayed with him until roadside assistance arrived. He was an elderly man alone with no one else to help him." The three interviewers exchanged glances that John couldn't quite read. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Miller," Mr. Davis said, standing and extending his hand. "We have several other candidates to interview. We'll be in touch within a week." John shook hands with each of them and was escorted back to the reception area. He couldn't tell if the interview had gone well or not. His technical answers had been solid, but Mr. Davis's questions about helping Frank had thrown him off balance. Outside the building, John checked his phone. It was nearly 11:30 a.m. He had 3 missed texts from his roommate Steve. "How's it going? Did you crush the interview? Hello? Updates, please." John typed a quick reply. "Just finished. Not sure how it went. Heading home now." He considered taking the bus home but decided to walk instead. The fresh air would help clear his head. As he walked, he replayed the interview in his mind, thinking of better answers he could have given to some questions. His phone buzzed with another text from Steve. "Did you tell them about the hospital project like we practiced?" "Yes," John replied. The AI team leader seemed interested in that. He walked for a few more blocks, then remembered Frank's card in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at it. Franklin Wilson was written at the top, with a phone number and address below. John felt a strange urge to call and thank Frank again for the ride, but decided it might seem odd. Instead, he put the card back in his pocket and continued walking. By the time John reached his apartment, it was past noon. Steve was in the living room playing a video game, but paused it when John walked in. "So, how did it go?" Steve asked, eagerly. John loosened his tie and fell onto the couch. "I honestly don't know. I made it just in time, but it was close." He explained the morning's events, helping Frank with the groceries, the dead battery, and the race downtown. Steve stared at him in disbelief. "Let me get this straight. You risked being late to the biggest interview of your career to help some random old guy? Are you crazy?" "What was I supposed to do?" John asked. "Leave him there?" "Yes," Steve exclaimed. "Or at least call someone else to help him. Peterson Technologies is the job you've been dreaming about for 2 years. John sighed and rubbed his temples. "Maybe you're right, but in the moment it felt like the right thing to do." "Well, I hope they still hire you," Steve said, turning his attention back to his game. "Otherwise, that was one expensive good deed." Over the next few days, John tried not to obsess about the interview. He applied for other jobs, worked on a personal coding project, and even went for a long run to clear his mind. But he kept checking his email and phone, hoping for news from Peterson Technologies. 4 days after the interview, John was making lunch when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Peterson Tech. His heart raced as he answered. "Hello, John Miller speaking. Mr. Miller, this is Alex from Peterson Technologies' HR department. Do you have a moment?" "Yes, of course," John replied, gripping the phone tightly. "I'm calling about your interview on Monday," Alex said, his voice professional and even. "We've reviewed all candidates and made our decision." John held his breath. "I'm sorry to inform you that we've decided to go with another candidate who better fits our current needs." John's stomach sank. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to interview. Mr. Davis asked me to tell you that he was impressed by your technical skills," Alex added. "But we needed someone with more experience in machine learning specifically." "Thank you for letting me know," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. After the call ended, John sat at the kitchen table staring at his half-made sandwich. He had really wanted that job. The disappointment felt heavy in his chest. When Steve came home that evening, John told him the news. "That's rough, man," Steve said, genuinely sympathetic. "Did they say why?" "They went with someone with more machine learning experience," John replied, not mentioning the part about his technical skills being impressive. "It didn't matter now." "Maybe if you'd been on time, things would have been different," Steve suggested. John shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe they would have chosen the other person anyway." "There will be other opportunities," Steve said, trying to be encouraging. "Want to go out for a beer? My treat." "Thanks, but I think I'll pass tonight," John replied. "I want to work on my coding project." Later that night, as John was focused on his laptop, writing code for a new app idea, his phone rang again. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, thinking it might be a spam call, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Is this John Miller?" asked a gruff, unfamiliar voice. "Yes, this is John," he answered cautiously. "This is Chuck Norris." John blinked, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, who?" "Chuck Norris," the voice repeated. "The actor." John nearly dropped his phone. Everyone knew Chuck Norris. The martial arts champion, action movie star, and internet meme. Legend. But why would he be calling John? Can I ask why you're calling?" John managed to say, his mind racing with confusion. "My father-in-law is Frank Wilson," Chuck explained. "He told me what you did for him the other day, missing your job interview to help him out." John was speechless. Frank was Chuck Norris's father-in-law? That seemed impossible. "Are you still there, son?" Chuck asked. "Yes, sir," John replied quickly. "I'm just surprised. I had no idea Frank was related to you." "He doesn't usually mention it," Chuck said, with a chuckle. "He likes his privacy, but he was very impressed by you. Said you didn't think twice about helping him, even though you had somewhere important to be." "It wasn't a big deal," John said modestly. "Anyone would have done the same." "That's where you're wrong," Chuck replied firmly. "Not many people these days would risk a job opportunity to help a stranger. That says a lot about your character." John didn't know how to respond to that. "Did you get the job?" Chuck asked. "No," John admitted. "They called today. They went with someone else." There was a brief pause on the line. "Well, sometimes things happen for a reason," Chuck said. "Listen, I have a proposition for you. I'm an investor in a tech startup called Ranger Solutions. They're working on some interesting AI projects, and they're looking for talented programmers. Would you be interested in talking to them?" John's mind was reeling. Was Chuck Norris offering to help him get a job? "Yes, I would definitely be interested," John said, trying to sound professional despite his shock. "Good," Chuck replied. "I'll have their CEO, Laura, call you tomorrow to set up a meeting." "And John?" "Yes, sir?" "What you did for Frank, that's the kind of integrity I look for in people I work with. Technical skills can be learned, but character is something you either have or you don't." After the call ended, John sat motionless, staring at his phone. Had that really just happened? Had Chuck Norris, the Chuck Norris, really called him about a job? He wanted to tell Steve, but his roommate had gone out. John could hardly believe it himself. How would he convince anyone else? As the reality of the conversation sank in, John felt a mixture of emotions: shock, excitement, and a strange sense that perhaps things had worked out exactly as they were supposed to. He had lost one opportunity by helping Frank, but that same act of kindness had opened an unexpected door. John smiled to himself and returned to his coding project, wondering what tomorrow's call from Ranger Solutions might bring. John woke up early the next morning, wondering if the phone call from Chuck Norris had been a dream. He checked his recent calls list to confirm it had really happened. The unknown number was there, and John had saved it under Chuck Norris before going to bed. It still seemed unbelievable. He made coffee and tried to focus on his morning routine, but he kept checking his phone, waiting for the call from Ranger Solutions. Steve was still asleep, having come home late from his bartending shift. John hadn't told him about Chuck Norris's call yet. He wanted to wait until he knew more about this potential job opportunity. At 9:30 a.m., his phone rang. The caller ID showed Laura Chen, Ranger Solutions. "Hello, this is John Miller," he answered, trying to sound confident. "Good morning, John. This is Laura Chen, CEO of Ranger Solutions. Chuck Norris spoke very highly of you." Laura's voice was warm and professional. John still couldn't believe that Chuck Norris had recommended him for a job. "Thank you for calling," John replied. "It was unexpected but very appreciated." "Chuck told me about how you helped his father-in-law and missed a job interview in the process," Laura said. "That kind of character is rare these days." "It was just the right thing to do," John said simply. "Well, we're looking for people who do the right thing," Laura continued. "Chuck mentioned you're a software developer with AI experience?" "Yes, I studied computer science and have been working with AI applications for the past 2 years, John confirmed. "Perfect. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a potential position with our team. Are you available this afternoon at 2 p.m., John? Was surprised by how quickly things were moving. "Yes, that works for me." "Excellent. Our office is in the Riverside building on Oak Street. Do you know it?" "I think so," John said, trying to picture the location. "I'll text you the exact address, and John, this isn't a formal interview. Just a conversation to see if we might be a good fit for each other." After the call ended, John sat at his kitchen table, stunned by this turn of events. His phone buzzed, with a text message from Laura containing the address and a brief note. "Looking forward to meeting you. Casual dress is fine." Steve wandered into the kitchen, yawning and heading straight for the coffee pot. "Morning," he mumbled, pouring himself a cup. "Steve, you're not going to believe what happened last night," John said, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "What?" Steve asked, still half asleep. "Remember the old man I helped with his car? The one that made me almost late for my interview?" Steve nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "Well, it turns out he's Chuck Norris's father-in-law, and Chuck Norris called me last night." Steve nearly choked on his coffee. "Yeah, right, good one. I'm serious," John insisted. "Check my phone if you don't believe me." Steve took John's phone and looked at the recent calls. His eyes widened. "You actually saved a number as Chuck Norris? That doesn't prove anything." "He called to thank me for helping his father-in-law and recommended me for a job at a tech startup. I'm meeting with their CEO this afternoon." Steve looked skeptical. "So you're telling me that because you helped some random old guy, Chuck Norris is getting you a job? That sounds like the plot of a cheesy movie." "I know it sounds crazy," John admitted. "But it's true. The CEO just called me to set up a meeting." Steve shook his head in disbelief. "If this is real, it's the luckiest thing that's ever happened to you. Missing that interview might have been the best career move you ever made." John spent the morning researching Ranger Solutions online. The company was only 3 years old, but had already developed several innovative AI applications. Their main product was a security system that used artificial intelligence to identify potential threats in public spaces while respecting privacy concerns. They had recently received significant funding to expand their team and develop new projects. At 1:30 p.m., John left for his meeting with Laura Chen. He wore clean jeans and a button-up shirt, casual but neat, as Laura had suggested. The Riverside building was modern and sleek, with large windows overlooking the river that ran through the city. In the lobby, John checked in with security and was directed to the 5th floor. The elevator doors opened to reveal a bright open office space with plants, comfortable-looking work areas, and large windows that let in natural light. It was very different from the corporate feel of Peterson Technologies. A young woman greeted him at the reception desk. "You must be John. Laura is expecting you. Follow me, please." She led him to a glass-walled conference room where a woman in her early 40s was reviewing documents. She looked up and smiled when John entered. "John, welcome. I'm Laura Chen." She stood and shook his hand firmly. "Please have a seat. Would you like some water or coffee?" "Water would be great, thank you," John replied, feeling more at ease than he had at his Peterson Technologies interview. Once they were settled, Laura began explaining more about Ranger Solutions. "We're still a small company, only 23 employees so far, but we're growing rapidly. Chuck is one of our investors and he takes a personal interest in who we hire. Character is as important to us as technical skills." John nodded, still amazed that Chuck Norris had recommended him. "So," Laura continued, "tell me about yourself. Not just your work experience, but what motivates you. What do you care about?" This was very different from the technical questions John had prepared for. He thought for a moment before answering. "I got into programming because I enjoy solving problems," he began. "But what I really care about is using technology to help people. My most meaningful project was rebuilding a hospital's database system. It wasn't cutting-edge work, but knowing that it helped patients get better care made it worthwhile." Laura nodded encouragingly. "And what about artificial intelligence? What interests you in that field?" "I think AI has incredible potential to improve lives," John replied, warming to the topic. "But it also comes with responsibility. The hospital project taught me that when you're dealing with systems that affect people's well-being, you have to be careful and thoughtful. AI multiplies that responsibility." "That's exactly the perspective we value here," Laura said with approval. "Now let me tell you about a project we're working on that I think might interest you." She explained that Ranger Solutions was developing an AI system to help emergency responders during natural disasters. The system would analyze data from multiple sources to identify areas where help was most needed and optimize resource allocation. "We need someone to work on the decision-making algorithms," Laura said. "Based on your experience and what Chuck has told me about you, I think you might be a good fit for this role." John felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work he had always wanted to do. "I would love to be part of that project," he said sincerely. "Good," Laura replied with a smile. "Now let's talk more specifically about your technical background and how it might apply to our needs." The conversation continued for almost 2 hours. Laura asked thoughtful questions about John's skills and experience, but also about his problem-solving approach and how he worked with others. John found himself sharing ideas about the emergency response system and suggesting ways to improve its accuracy and reliability. By the end of the meeting, John felt energized rather than drained. This didn't feel like an interview, it felt like a genuine exchange of ideas with someone who shared his values. "Well, John," Laura said finally, "I think you would be an excellent addition to our team. The position offers a salary of $95,000 per year, with health benefits and stock options. We also have a flexible work schedule and encourage our team to maintain a healthy work-life balance. Would you be interested?" John was stunned. Not only was she offering him the job on the spot, but the salary was $15,000 more than Peterson Technologies had advertised. "Yes, I would definitely be interested," he replied, trying to contain his excitement. "Wonderful. We can start the paperwork tomorrow if that works for you. And by the way," she added with a smile, "Chuck mentioned that you and his father-in-law got along well. Frank has been looking for someone to help his grandson learn coding. Would you be open to that?" "Of course," John said without hesitation. "I'd be happy to help." As John left the building, he felt like he was floating. Everything had happened so quickly. Just a few days ago, he had been worried about being late for his interview at Peterson Technologies. Now he had a better job, offer with a company doing work that truly mattered to him. He pulled out his phone to call Steve with the good news, but then hesitated and dialed a different number instead. "Hello?" answered a familiar voice. "Frank? This is John Miller, the young man who helped with your car the other day." "John, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to thank you," John said sincerely. "For everything." There was a pause, then Frank chuckled. "I hear my son-in-law called you." "Yes, sir, and I just met with Laura Chen at Ranger Solutions. She offered me a job." "Congratulations. I told you that you were a good young man. Sometimes doing the right thing works out better than following the original plan." As John walked home in the afternoon sunshine, he thought about how a simple decision to help someone had changed the course of his life. He had no way of knowing that morning at the bus stop that missing his interview would lead to something better. He had just done what felt right in the moment. His phone buzzed with a text message. 6 months had passed since John joined Ranger Solutions. The early summer morning was warm as he walked into the modern office building, greeting the security guard with a smile. He no longer felt like a newcomer here. This place had become his second home. John's desk was by a large window overlooking the river. He had personalized it with a small plant, a photo of his family, and a framed note from Chuck Norris that read, "Character matters. Keep doing the right thing." It was a simple message, but it meant a lot to John. As he settled in for the day, Laura Chen stopped by his desk. "Morning, John. How's the emergency response system coming along?" "Good morning, Laura. We're making great progress," John replied, pulling up some charts on his computer screen. "The latest tests show a 93% accuracy rate in identifying high-priority areas during a simulated flood. That's up 7% from last month." Laura nodded approvingly. "Excellent work. The team in Florida wants to run a live test next month during their emergency preparedness drill. Think we'll be ready?" "Definitely," John said confidently. "We just need to fine-tune the resource allocation algorithms, but we're on schedule." "Perfect. Oh, and don't forget, Frank and Chuck are stopping by for lunch today. They want to see the demo." John had almost forgotten. "Right, I'll make sure everything is ready." After Laura left, John sent a quick text to Frank. "Looking forward to seeing you at lunch. Bringing Nick?" Nick was Frank's 14-year-old grandson, whom John had been teaching coding on weekends. Frank replied a few minutes later, "Yes, Nick is coming. He's excited to show you his new game." John smiled. Teaching Nick had been one of the unexpected joys of these past months. The boy was smart and eager to learn, soaking up programming knowledge like a sponge. They had started with simple games, but Nick was already working on more complex projects. At noon, John went to the conference room where lunch was being set up. Frank arrived first, walking more steadily than he had 6 months ago. His health had improved, partly due to the regular exercise routine he had started. "John, my boy," Frank called out, giving him a warm handshake. "How's my favorite programmer?" "I'm doing great, Frank. How about you?" "Can't complain. The doctor says my numbers are better. Says I should thank my grandson-in-law for getting me that fancy exercise bike." Nick came in next, a lanky teenager, with a tablet under his arm. "Hey, John, wait till you see what I made. It's almost finished." "Can't wait," John replied, genuinely interested. "After lunch, you can show me." The door opened again and Chuck Norris walked in. Despite having met him several times now, John still felt a little starstruck. Chuck had that effect on people. "John," Chuck greeted him with a firm handshake. "Frank tells me you're doing wonders with Nick's coding skills." "He's a natural," John replied honestly. "Picks things up faster than I did at his age." Lunch was casual and enjoyable. They ate sandwiches while John explained the emergency response system to Chuck and showed him the latest test results. Chuck asked intelligent questions that showed he understood the technology's implications. "So this could help save lives during hurricanes, floods, even wildfires?" Chuck asked. "That's the goal," John confirmed. "By analyzing data from weather services, social media, emergency calls, and satellite imagery, The AI can predict which areas will need help most urgently and help emergency services deploy their resources more effectively. Impressive, Chuck said. When I invested in Ranger Solutions, this is exactly the kind of work I hoped they'd do. After lunch, Nick proudly showed John the game he had been developing, a simple but clever puzzle game with increasingly difficult levels. The graphics are basic now, Nick explained, but I'm going to improve them next. This is really good, Nick, John said, impressed by the boy's progress. The game mechanics are solid. That's the hard part. Graphics can always be improved later. As they were talking, Steve texted John, "Dude, guess who came into the bar last night? The HR guy from Peterson Technologies. He remembered you and asked what happened after your interview. Told him you're working with Chuck Norris now." He didn't believe me. John smiled at the message. It was funny to think about how things had worked out. If he had gotten the job at Peterson Technologies, he would never have met Chuck, never have started teaching Nick, and never have worked on a project that could help save lives during disasters. Later that afternoon, Laura called a team meeting to discuss the upcoming Florida test. John and 5 other programmers gathered in the conference room. "Before we get started," Laura announced, "I have some exciting news. The emergency response system has attracted attention from the National Weather Service. They're interested in implementing it nationwide if our tests continue to show good results." The team exchanged excited glances. This was bigger than any of them had expected. "John," Laura continued, "since you've been leading the development, I'd like you to present the system at their headquarters in 2 weeks. Chuck will come along. He has some connections there that might help." John was surprised but pleased. "I'd be honored," he said. After the meeting, John stayed late to work on his presentation for the Weather Service. The office gradually emptied as other employees headed home. Around 7 o'clock, he decided to take a break and went to the small kitchen for coffee. To his surprise, Chuck was there, looking at the photos on the bulletin board, pictures of the Ranger Solutions team at various events and milestones. "Thought you'd left hours ago," John said. Chuck shook his head. "Had some calls to make. Business never sleeps." He gestured to the photos. "You know, when I started investing in tech companies, people thought I was crazy. Stick to fitness equipment and movies, they said. But I wanted to be part of something that makes a real difference." John nodded. "That's why I love working. Here, what we're doing matters." Chuck studied John for a moment. "You know, when Frank told me about you, how you stopped to help him even though you were in a hurry, I had a feeling about you. Good character is rare these days." "I was just doing what anyone would do," John said modestly. "No," Chuck said, firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have walked by. Most people do walk by." He paused. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made that interview on time?" John had thought about it occasionally. "I might have gotten the job at Peterson Technologies. I'd probably be coding banking software or something. And instead, you're building something that could save thousands of lives," Chuck pointed out. Funny how things work out. They talked a while longer before Chuck left. John returned to his desk to finish his work, thinking about how much his life had changed in 6 months. When he finally headed home, the night was clear and star-filled. John took the long way, walking along the river. He thought about the day. Frank's car had broken down and how close he had come to just catching his bus and continuing with his planned life. One small decision, to help or not to help, had altered his path completely. He had found meaningful work, made new friends, and gained a mentor in Chuck Norris of all people. More importantly, he had learned that doing the right thing, even when inconvenient, sometimes led to unexpected blessings. His phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Nick can't stop talking about the game ideas you gave him. Thank you for being so patient with him." John smiled and typed a reply. "It's my pleasure. He's going to be better than me someday." As he walked home under the stars, John felt content in a way he never had before. His life had purpose and direction, and it had all started with a simple choice to help a stranger in need. The following Sunday, John hosted dinner at his apartment. Frank came, bringing his famous apple pie. Nick showed off his latest coding project. Steve, who had finally accepted that John really did know Chuck Norris, was on his best behavior. And Chuck, despite his celebrity status, fit right in, telling stories that had everyone laughing. Looking around at these people who had become so important to him, John realized something profound. Success wasn't just about landing the right job or making good money. It was about connections, about making a difference in people's lives, whether through teaching a teenager to code, creating technology that could save lives, or simply stopping to help someone in need. As the evening wound down, Chuck pulled John aside. "I've been meaning to ask you something. How would you feel about heading up a new educational initiative, teaching coding to underprivileged kids? It would be separate from your work at Ranger Solutions, a few hours on weekends." "I'd love to," John said without hesitation. "Good," Chuck replied. "I've seen how you are with Nick. You have a gift for teaching." Later, after everyone had left, John stood on his small balcony, looking out at the city lights. 6 months ago, he had been disappointed about missing a job interview. Now he couldn't imagine his life any other way. Sometimes the best opportunities came disguised as bad luck. Sometimes a missed bus and a delayed interview were exactly what you needed. And sometimes doing the right thing led to places you never expected to go. John smiled to himself, grateful for that morning at the bus stop when he had chosen to cross the street and help an elderly man with his groceries. It had been such a small thing, but it had changed everything.